Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from Group 7 and today we are gonna present about DNS server implementation in Ubuntu. But first of all, let me introduce my group first. My name is Aditya, Rafi, Putrananda, and Faza and Gibran. Next, we are gonna talk about definition of DNS server Ubuntu first, and let my friend introduce.
Definition of DNS server. DNS server is an interaction between computers that are connected via the server by recognizing each other's IP address or identifier. The system on the domain name server will change the website URL into an IP address briefly, so that users are not bothered to type in the IP address manually when they want to visit a page. DNS service application on the internet that is useful for translating a domain name to an IP address, and one type of system that serves requests formatting IP address to FQDN or Funny Qualified Domain Name, and from FQDN to IP addresses. DNS is usually used in internet-related applications such as web browser or email, where DNS helps map a computer hostname to an IP address. Besides being used on the internet, DNS can also be implemented on a private network or the internet. Function of DNS server. Broadly speaking, the domain server has a function as well as the understanding itself, but to be clear, here are the functions in detail. 1. A cross-section of IP data-based domain name by asking for information on the IP address of a website. 2. Make it easy for users to send emails that are centralized on one server, thus greatly increasing the mobility of users wherever they are to connect. 3. Can set a special domain access right portal by computer users, so that security is always monitored. 3. Set the traffic rate of computer activity through the IP address as its identity. Last, can set information access right over a network of several computers on one server. If the computers want to access the information, the domain name server will automatically ask for an IP address. Advantage and disadvantage of DNS server. Advantage of DNS server is easy. DNS is very easy because the user is no longer bothered to remember the IP address of the computer, just the host name. 2. Consistently. The IP address of a computer can change, but the host name does not have to change. Last, simple. Easy to configure DNS server for admins. DNS is easy to implement in the TCP or IP protocol. DNS server is easy to configure for admins. Users are no longer bothered to remember IP address. Disadvantage of DNS. Users cannot use multiple names to search for domain names both on the internet and on the intranet. DNS is not easy to implement. 3. Inconsistent. Last one, cannot create multiple domain names.
Next, my name is Faza Nugraha and I want to explain how this DNS server works. First is, before installing the application package, first update and upgrade the system with the command is sudo apt upgrade and sudo apt upgrade. Next is the bind9 package can be installed via the following command: sudo apt install bind9. Next, to start configuring DNS using bind9, we first move into the etc bind directory. Next, we create a db IP file by copying the db 127 file. Also copy the db local file with the name db domain. After the two files are made, we edit the db domain file first. In the DB domain, replace file or change localhost to the domain name we want to create. If like this example, I try to create a domain for zonabiner.dev. In this case, I will also create two subdomains, namely www.zonabiner.dev and blog.zonabiner.dev. Don't forget to give our DNS server IP address. Next, if you also want to add an MX record, which will later be used as a mail server on the DNS server that you create, you can use the following config. Next, we edit the DB IP file, replace or change localhost according to your domain name. Remember that number 27 is replaced with the last number of the IP address server. For example, if I use the IP address 10.1.1.27 as the DNS server IP, the last number is 27. Next, in the name .conf.local file, we define the zone based on the domain name that we create along with the DNS server IP address. In the 1.1.10.in header.arpa section, it should be note that this is actually a reverse of our DNS IP address. If the DNS server IP address is 10.1.1.27, it will be refers to 1.1.10 plus in addr.arp. Why is the last digit of the IP address not reserved? This last number is already in the DP IP file. Because our DNS server only manage the zonabiner.dev domain. We don't manage other domains such as google.com, facebook.com, etc. So that we can access other domains, we must add DNS forwarding. For example, here I use Google Public DNS 8.8.8.8 as DNS forwarding. The last step we have to do is restart the bind service in order to load the last configuration. Make sure the service is running normally with no error.
All about our presentation about DNS server implementation in Ubuntu. Thank you for the attention. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.